Hi there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. Today I'm joined by Julia Regan. Julia Regan is a health tech innovator with a proven track record of bringing solutions to market that help remove friction for healthcare providers, patients, payers, and pharma. She has designed and launched the first real-time benefit check and price transparency solution at the point of prescribing. She's currently the CEO and co-founder of RxLightning. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, how did you come up with the idea of RX Lightning? Is this based off like a personal challenge you faced in the past or something you saw in others? Like, how'd you come to that journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I have probably the normal journey of most entrepreneurs and founders in organizations. I
Is there a normal journey?
No, actually, I never looked at myself as, oh, I'm going to go out and start a company that's potentially disrupting an industry or changing an industry or having impact. Like, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you that was crazy, like, not my personality. And throughout my career, I say that I've built really good products that have been able to help providers and patients and different stakeholders in the industry. And based upon building those products and more conversations and watching the market, I kind of just naturally evolved into, I have another idea and it's addressing a big target. And I have some personal experiences with it as well, where I'm like, I think we could really help solve this. So when I think everybody really could probably think into their personal life about a relative or a family or a friend that has been treated with a specialty medication for some sort of either rare chronic disease or cancer, transplant. Like, people know somebody. They might have to think maybe a little bit further than their immediate family. And there's typically always stories about getting patients started on medication and the delays in therapy. And there's a lot of, when you think about patients and the typical consumer in the world, they don't necessarily know how to navigate the healthcare system. And without knowing how to navigate the system, it just takes longer. So I think that I was watching this market evolve and saying, I can't believe patients have to wait for their medications. And I can't believe that when they're diagnosed with something like cancer or MS or any of these rare diseases, they're told that they need to start therapy and then they have to wait. And then they don't even know when they're going to be able to start treatment. And it's because it's really a paper-based phone call, fax, manual-based process. So with my experience and my co-founder's experience, Brad Allen, we were able to build a solution that takes and removes that paper out of the process and make it free to providers and work with manufacturers and specialty pharmacies to really help remove some of the delays that the paperwork causes. So, but it was just a natural journey. And then we started right before COVID. And I think I go back, I'm just flying around.
No
I
worries.
go back to where we're at now as an organization and look back on COVID and was like, oh my God, I'm so happy that I started the organization right before the pandemic really hit, because if it hit 2 weeks earlier, I don't know if I would have said I would have jumped into the organization with 2 feet, because life was so uncertain at that point in time. But now I look back and I'm like, oh, thank God I did that, because it's been, we're really helping patients and we're really speeding up the process.
So, these patients, do you have a personal story yourself that you think really motivate you to make the jump? Because I do recognize for a lot of entrepreneurs, something they all have to reconcile is like, how much risk am I willing to take in my career? And I think it takes a fair amount of risk to be like, yep, I've done the corporate job and I love how comfortable it is, but I want to do something new now.
Yeah, I do. There is a personal story with individuals in our family that are on specialty medications, and they've had challenges getting them. And myself and my husband, we're very educated consumers of specialty meds, and we could navigate the system extremely well. And we still have challenges ourselves. So when I think about patients that are, maybe elderly and alone and don't have family, or they're
Hmm.
just don't understand some of these complexities that are in the healthcare market, because it's a pretty complex industry. And there's always, even myself, I find myself saying, like, why do we set things up this way? Why do we make things harder than what it is? And there's a lot of layers underneath our healthcare system and why it's designed that way. So we are very mission driven around trying to solve this problem for patients. Fundamentally, we think that patients should know when they could start their medications and have access to their treatments. And even if there's processes that you have to go through, they should just know what those processes are and where they're at in the process, so they don't have to wonder, like, oh, it's going to be a week, or it's going to be 2 weeks, or is it going to be a month?
What's a typical waiting period?
It depends on the disease state and the medication. So it could be 5 days. It could be a couple months. It just depends. I've had friends of mine tell me that one story, there's a lot of stories that I have, but one story that is more recent is a friend of mine was telling me that her daughter has some really bad dermatology issues, and she needs an injection, and they're really expensive. And it's been about a 6-month process to try to get her onto therapy. And they're high cost therapies, and they do impact a quality of life. It's not, in her situation, it's not a terminal illness, but it's a quality of life. If you're half your arms covered in something that's bothering you and itchy, and your child, like, that's not how you want to grow up.
Right.
And there's these medicines to treat them. So it just depends. But what we're seeing in our platform is that medicines that typically take about 10 days to dispense, we're hearing from our providers that they're getting dispensed in 2. So we're hopefully trying to, we're not going to make it perfect. There's still some of those processes that have to go through, but we do believe that we could speed it up even a little bit. It's better for the patients.
So I last went to my allergist about 2 weeks ago, and then they wanted me to consider a solution called Solaire, which, for the audience, it's like, I don't know if it's considered a specialty medicine or not, but it's one of those things where, like, the price range is like completely ridiculous. Apparently, it goes as low as $0, so effectively free, to as high as $2,500 per month. And I'm like, well, where do I fall in that spectrum? And I'm like, the doctor's like, sorry, I actually don't know. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful. Like, I can't afford $2,500 a month. I can afford like 0 to, like, call it maybe like 50, right? But once you're above that $50 price point, like, I would start to consider, like, is it worth it? I have no idea. But you're right. I feel like it is definitely like a quality of life thing, and it's unfortunate that some drugs are like completely into the, like, moonshot levels of pricing.
Well, and so those scenarios, there's most likely some copay cards or programs that the manufacturer has to offer assistance to patients. So that's where RxLightning isn't creating those programs or making decisions around the cost of those. But what we're doing, so that medication would be dispensed by a specialty pharmacy. And when the doctor would prescribe that, they would want whatever the diagnosis was and any other clinical information to validate the why you need it, because it is expensive if your insurance is going to go pay for it. So manufacturers, whoever makes Solaire, I can't remember who makes that off the top of my head, but the manufacturer typically has these programs and assistant, like copay cards or patient assistance programs that certain patients could qualify for. So they typically have those programs set up through what's called a hub. And it takes a piece of paper for your doctor and you to fill out and complete and send it over to this organization, which is essentially a call center that helps manage getting the patient to therapy and seeing, like, oh, do you fit into that $0 copay, or what is the cost of the medication? So our system basically takes those paper applications that exist and has made it digital. So your provider could go on, and instead of saying, oh, I want to prescribe Solaire, I need to find the piece of paper that's associated with this manufacturer, they could just go on and say, I want to prescribe Solaire. Oh, here's all the options of where it could go from a specialty pharmacy perspective. They do have a hub program. and they could complete the paperwork for that prescription right in the system and then send it off. And then the intent is to get the status updates back as well. So they could not only send the information, but know, oh, the doctor's working or the pharmacy is working through the prior authorization, or they've maintained coverage, or, oh, it's shipped. So you get a little bit more insight into what's going on. But that is definitely a specialty med.
So I noticed on your website, you list the fact that you're compatible with all specialty medicines. Is that like all with an asterisk, or does it actually mean all? Like, and if it is all, like, how are you finding all the connections to make that possible?
Yeah. So, and there's probably a little bit of an asterisk on there because, so at first the first asterisk, there might be a couple asterisks actually. The asterisk is more around how you define a specialty medication. Okay. So, there are there's multiple different accreditation associations that all have different ways to define specialty meds. So RxLightning's definition of a specialty medication is really a medication that has to be dispensed or has a component of dispense at a specialty pharmacy.
I see.
So, and when we say specialty pharmacy, it's pharmacies that aren't down the street. It's not your local pharmacy that you're going to walk into. It's pharmacies that are typically mailing out the medication to either the patient's home or the provider's office for administration. And they're high cost. There's typically some sort of sensitivity around temperature storage requirements. So everybody's familiar with that with the COVID vaccine. So one of my benefits is I don't have to explain that anymore. I get it. So we started with the big 15 specialty pharmacies. So if you look at the market, there's 15 specialty pharmacies that dispense about 98% of the specialty prescriptions in the nation. So we started there, and we have about 950 specialty meds within the platform. There's tons of different disease states. I probably couldn't even name them all because of it. And now we're working on we're working to add more pharmacies in the platform, and we're working with manufacturers. But for the most part, it's pretty comprehensive.
Was it an easy sell to those 15, I guess, specialty pharmacies to partner with you, or is it like something difficult they had to like work years for?
Yeah. Well, so we actually decided we're not actually partnered with all 15 of the pharmacies.
I see.
So all of the paper is publicly available, and we basically said, I'm going to build this because it needs to be built, and just by some of the upfront value proposition. So from a provider perspective, you don't have to go find the form or figure out what you need to complete. You don't need to look at what is required versus not required based upon the drug. Like the technology does all that. And then we believed that as we build it, as we have providers using it because it's free to them, we will have the volume on our system, and then we will connect into all those pharmacies. So we are connected with some of them, but our solution still works for the physician and the patient, regardless if we have the connectivity.
Gotcha.
Even though we definitely want the connectivity, there's more value with connectivity to the pharmacies. But you kind of have to, what I've learned as a founder is, in order to approach something and really drive change, you need to be willing to build something that people want to use. And if I built it just based upon a pharmacy I was working with, I would want to get adoption, because the reality is providers don't send to one pharmacy and they don't just write one prescription. They write many prescriptions and they send to many pharmacies, because a lot of the pharmacies are dictated based upon the patient's insurance, or just where they're located, or there's a lot of reasons that physicians make decisions on which pharmacy to use. But typically you don't see them just say, I'm going to only send to this pharmacy, and that's it.
So since your platform is free to these providers, does that mean you're getting money through, I guess, like partnerships with the pharmacies or through the specialty drug distributors? Is that how your company makes money?
So we're partnering with them to really provide more comprehensive solutions and integrations. So it's really about plugging into their system so faxes are removed. It's about providing the status updates. It's customization also. So there's in specialty medications, limited distribution drug networks are very prevalent, and it's actually a very huge pain point for providers because a lot of providers don't know, oh, this is the pharmacy network that I could send this to. So working with the manufacturers to make sure that those distribution networks are identified and they're plugging into naturally into their system, and we're going digitally out to the patients to get consent if the patient's not in the office, especially with COVID, those patients aren't in the office anymore. So there's a lot of enhanced type of features that by working with the manufacturers and the specialty pharmacies we get.
So can you walk me through the journey of how you got, I guess you made your quote unquote like first dollar? Like what did it take? What level was the platform at in terms of feature availability, I guess drug compatibility?
So we were, so last year we started the company in January, and then I joined in February, and my co-founder joined like literally right at the end of February before COVID. So most of last year was just about building the product, and him and I working through the design of what it was and him actually coding. So COVID in a way was very beneficial for us because we were just able to sit and focus on what we needed to do without distractions and build something. So we had several partnerships that happened before we were live. Or we're in the process of us going live into our beta experience. So I think one of the things that I've learned and what feels really special about RxLightning is that this product is solving a major pain point. So everybody that we talk to, and a lot of people have come to us, not necessarily me going out talking to people, because there's a lot of kind of information out there about us. People could fully resonate that this is a huge problem in the market, and that once we get into what we're doing and how we're doing it, they're seeing that we have the potential to really solve it. So it's been a little bit different journey because I said that we're an organization that came to market. It was my co-founder and I. We already had product market fit. We knew which users would start using us. We had physicians waiting to use the platform. We were in the process of contracting with a pharmacy. We were in the process of contracting with some tech solutions that were taking us out into the EHR workflow. And it was just about bringing it to market, and now it's about driving growth. And so we're not trying to tweak and say, what is it that we're building and why? We kind of knew that from the beginning. I look back on the business plan I wrote last summer when I was trying to raise our first capital. And I could use the same business plan. Now my financials are completely different, and we've evolved our thinking in different potential opportunities and different value propositions. But ultimately, the business plan, the way I wrote it, still applies to everything we're doing, which most startups, and you probably talk to a lot more than I do, that's not the typical journey. It's usually iteration after iteration after iteration to find product market fit, and that could take 2 to 3 years. Whereas we kind of had it from conception, which is just nice.
So how did you solve the discoverability problem? So you have this idea and you have this path to executing on building the product, but how do you generate awareness for this product and platform outside of your personal connections? Or has it been primarily that?
Yeah, I think it's been primarily that. We are so blessed, and I don't know why we've been so blessed, but I just feel so fortunate because I had a really great connection or network, I would say, of people because I've been in the industry so long that when I started promoting what we were doing, and I was able to get some other individuals from an investor standpoint that are also very well connected and very well known in the industry. And it's just kind of gone from there. Earlier this year, we were, well, here's actually a really network story. It's just a network story. So we did 2 accelerators last year, and both accelerators, one was Accelerate Health, and then it was in Louisville, and it's a health tech accelerator. And then the other accelerator was actually a grant. It's called the VOTE grant, which is a well-known grant in the Louisville area. And I did them both simultaneously, and I feel
so you
like
didn't sleep.
I didn't sleep. I raised our first $1 million during the accelerator, but I had it was like perfect timing, because every week when I would go into one of those accelerator classes, it was exactly the things that I needed to do. So the homework was perfectly relevant to what I needed. And it was like this fast course to get the product out and get the market information out there. And Accelerate Health has a very large network connection in digital healthcare as well. So because of that, because both of them, in a way, there was an article about RxLightning and our fundraising. And so that went out on Business First. And then from there, I networked with one individual who then connected me to another individual who was a female founder who had an exit, who was at Microsoft. And from there, she connected me to another female leader at Microsoft. And I started talking to them about their startup program. And, in January, we were able to announce that we were selected as part of their program, and we're working with them on some of our product technology and some enhancements that we're doing. And then we're doing some co-marketing and co-selling opportunities with them. And it all started from the network that then led to another conversation, which led to another conversation. And because of the problem we're solving, and because of some of the traction that we've had in the industry, we've been just really fortunate and blessed that these conversations and everybody that's talking to us are starting to connect us to other people. And like, your network is so important, and you don't know you just don't know the value of the conversation until you have the conversation and where it could lead. So it's interesting how it plays out. And now we're doing more marketing and we're doing more PR, and Microsoft's definitely helping get the word out about who we are and what we're doing. So now there's like a whole strategy that I got to keep up with my marketing team.
And all these, I guess these partners, are they like equity partners? Is that how they're incentivized, or is more of a like nonprofit initiative for them? Like how are they like incentivized to, I guess, fuel your growth?
Well, Microsoft, we're on their technology platform. So
okay, I see.
Theirs is about helping us grow for long-term usage, which we love the Microsoft tech. We'd be on the Microsoft platform regardless. Most of the other individuals are partners of or investors of ours. So the Accelerate Health is on part of our cap table as well. So
Gotcha.
There's because they're part owners, I guess, in the company that they are very helpful and connect us to people, and it's interesting how all that happens.
How'd you hear about Accelerate Health?
So this is quite funny. You're gonna laugh at me and be like,
okay.
So I was early on, knew nothing about starting a company. COVID was happening, and I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to raise capital, and I need to figure out how to do all this stuff. So I decided to Google, because the world was shut down. So I'm in Louisville. I live in Greenville. The smallest town in Indiana is New Albany, Indiana. So instead of Googling Louisville, Kentucky startup, I Google New Albany, Indiana startup community. I ended up getting connected with the startup community in New Albany, Columbus. Like Columbus, Ohio area, like that. So there's this like Tiger Talk. It's like a podcast, I would say. And they have these meetings and with entrepreneurs, and they have all these sessions. And I started attending them every week because I was like, I need to learn everything. I need to learn about starting a company that I don't know. So there was one individual that was on talking about their experience with grants through the government. And I was like, oh, there's grants through the government. Well, RxLightning would not apply for, like, would not be possible to get any of those really. But through that conversation, they were talking about, oh, there's this website and you could search this and go look at this. So I was like taking notes feverishly. So then I started looking, and that's how I found out about Vote and Accelerate Health. I was literally like days before the applications were due, feverishly copying and pasting from my business plan into Submit. And then I was fortunate enough to meet the deadlines, talk to them. They liked what we were doing, and they were accepted into both of the programs. Well, so I look back and there's so many stories like that.
I feel like most entrepreneurs have this like idea, like a just in time. Like they did something just in time for it to be relevant to the business, and prior to that, they just didn't consider it, even though it might seem obvious in hindsight or obvious to other people.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. And now I'm like, now that COVID's kind of lifting, I'm connected to the Louisville startup community. There's a great Louisville startup community here. I've met a ton of founders. Like I met them finally in person a couple of weeks ago. It's just. There's so many resources out there that I don't think people know about until you know about them. And it's the founder journey is interesting. You just got to laugh at yourself sometimes for the naive things that you just don't know it because you weren't exposed to it.
One of the things I really appreciate about the founder journey is I think you have to be humble about it, because you realize how much you don't know once you start trying to learn how to do anything, really.
Yeah.
Even without diving into the niches of the healthcare industry or any specific vertical of technology, there's just so many things that like many people might assume other people know, but in reality, it's not common knowledge. Right. There's actually very few pieces of common knowledge nowadays.
Yes. And there's just so much, like who would have thought to go read a book? Like there's tons of great books out there for like that could be from how to set up a company to how to like think about things strategically. And it's just like when you're first starting things, it's almost you just got to learn. You kind of got to learn and go as you grow. And I'm like the most transparent person, so. The founder journey is tough. You need to have good co-founders with you. You have to have a good support team from a family friend perspective, as well as a business mentorship perspective. And my experience has been being willing to omit things that I didn't know and ask for help where I needed it. Actually allowed me to learn it and move past and grow quicker because of it, versus saying, oh yeah, I know how to do this, and then struggling trying to figure out how to do it on my own. It's like, no, I'll just ask somebody else for help.
In the support group that you mentioned, how'd you build it? Maybe not so much the family and friends side, but like the business, like mentors. Like how do you because I recognize one thing I hear commonly is that there's a lot of bad mentors or mentors who want to take advantage of situations in a way that's more favorable for them than it is for you. How do you know how to like vet for the right mentors?
Yeah, so I have a mentor that's been with me for years. His name's Richard Cohan. He hired me out of Novo into Dr. First years ago, and I think I reported to him for like 5 or 6 years. And he has always in my career given me good advice, and it didn't stop when I stopped reporting to him. So he was somebody that I could just trust. He is like, I know his kids, I know his wife. We always catch up about them. you know, he's a friend, not just a mentor, and somebody that I consider in such high regard. He probably doesn't even know it, but the relationship is very meaningful. So he's been a great guide to help guide me through other mentors that I've met. Through the accelerator programs, I was able to meet people that you could tell are genuinely doing some of their volunteer work to help other founders and to help the local community. And with that, I've been able to have some other mentors that I meet with one individual who was a coach actually in both accelerator programs. So he had me like 2 days in a row for like 8 hours or whatever. And I would say to him sometimes, sorry, Greg, you heard this yesterday. But after those accelerators, he just was so valuable from perspective that I brought him on as an advisor for me. Just he has no healthcare experience, but he has a ton of tech experience and startup experience that a lot of the growth challenges that I have around staffing or board. Like I remember calling him with some silly questions like, okay, so I have a board now. Do I have to officially call the board meeting to order, or is that like until we get bigger? Like some of those things, like that you just don't know. You just don't know until you know. But he always comes. We kind of laugh, and then he just is a great source of knowledge. And most of my advisors and mentors, I've been able to consistently set up a cadence with them. And it's not just about what I could get out of the relationship. I think that they'd probably also say that they learn stuff from me too. And there's a relationship there. Like, it's not just the business aspect. Like, I want to get to know them and them get to know me and us bond, because that's what's life kind of is about. Like, everybody you meet, you got to have a, you know, you want to get to know them. Or, you know, I don't want to just talk to you once and then not talk to you again. If that makes sense.
It's funny how you mentioned asking them these questions, and I wouldn't feel embarrassed at all, because I feel like if other people knew what I typed into Google in terms of like, how do I do this in my business? What do I do in this situation? I'm pretty sure Google has all of the logs of all of the people who just like search for things that seem obvious to someone else, but like, man, there's no like tutorial on how to be an entrepreneur. There's no guide on how to like run meetings. There's no tutorial on how to hire well. Like you kind of like guessing. There's like a lot of trial and error. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm laughing because I think we've all been there with Google. I use Google all the time. Google is like one of the most amazing thing. That I love Google. I love me some Amazon, and I love me some Apple.
So it's funny you mentioned those three companies, because 100% of my stock portfolio is in those three companies. I'm pretty bullish on all three of those. I love their products, love their services. I wish Apple was a little friendlier with Google, but oh well, that's their choice.
Yeah, no. That's great.
I'm also a huge fan of the app, like what Amazon has done with the Kindle platform. Like the fact that I can like buy books and not have to wait for them to be shipped to me, but I can just like read it digitally, as well as maybe like save the paper and save the storage as well. I just love it.
Yeah. I've never been able to get into the Kindle with books because I am still a notebook person. Like I am still a hard book. Here, so this is the book I'm reading now, Blitz Scaling. And it's because of when I read books, it's not just like, it's like all the notes and the stuff and like the tangible, like, look, I got notes in front of my book. So I feel like I do that in digital.
I know it's a waste of money. Some people consider it a waste of money, but I don't consider it a waste of money to buy both the audio book, the physical book, and the digital book, just to have all forms available of my favorite books.
I like that. You know, that would make time management easier, because I'm not a music person. I was telling you this earlier. I'm tone deaf, but I in the car, because I'm not a music person, I'm probably the only person in the world that doesn't listen to music in the car. So I drive in silence, but audiobooks would probably be helpful.
What have you been learning from Blitz Scaling recently? I've actually just talked about that recently with one of my previous guests.
So I love the book. It has challenged me to think in ways with that aren't necessarily obvious in healthcare, I would say. I think that there's so many questions that it raises for me strategically, that because they go through all these other examples and you're like, okay, so how does that apply to my organization, and how does it apply to my organization, and is it time to even apply that to my organization? Like every single chapter is something that could be thought-provoking. My team is actually reading it, and one of the things that I've said is, guys, don't try to read it front to back because we're not going to get through it. It's too thought-provoking to do that. If you're just reading it cover to cover, you're probably missing all the wisdom that's actually within the pages. And I'm sure that the other individual you spoke with, the way they're reading it and how it applies to them is probably completely different than the way I'm reading it and how it applies to me. So it's a great book. We just closed our seed series, and my lead investor sent it to me along with a bunch of Doritos, because he met me when I was eating Doritos, I guess. Like that.
So between reading books and audiobooks and their equivalents, and then also your experiences in accelerators and your experience in an MBA program, how much of your experiences are learned from each of those different categories?
It's probably all of it kind of together, I would say. I don't know if I could
equally.
Yes and no. Like the MBA program, like formal education for me, because I'm not doing anything. Well, my MBA program is in healthcare management, so there's kind of I'm not really in the clinic though, but there was a lot of like fundamental finance and stuff that was helpful. But like I feel like education in general equips you with knowledge and the work ethic to dive into things and master them. Whereas the accelerators, it was tangible application of some of those principles to the business that you're actually in. And then books is depending on what book there is. Like there's some books that I have that I just reference more as like there's some business law books that I'll like go get and reference some things. But the books I think are there to shape thinking and leadership qualities and I don't know, whatever it is that I'm looking at. Usually I'm reading a book though because it was recommended to me by somebody and there's a reason. The other book that I've read recently that I keep on my desk somewhere is the Traction book. So that helped us actually apply some principles from an operational perspective to the organization as we were growing to ensure we weren't operating in chaos. Like, well, we're still probably operating in chaos because every company, regardless of how large or small they are, operates in chaos, I think. But I don't know. It's hard to kind of say which one is the most useful. I think that they all played a role. The MBA probably is the least relevant to now because learning about doing things and then actually doing them are completely different. Like what you expect is not the founder group.
At some level, it's interesting when the theoretical meets the practical. Like you can learn about running as much as you want. You can learn about all the perfect technique to like take a step, perfect technique for breathing. But until you actually run, it doesn't there's no connection. You can't run a marathon after reading a book. Like no matter how genius you are on the I don't know physiology of running, you actually running is a completely different thing. And I think entrepreneurship and books are the same way.
Yeah. I completely agree. But there's always I've found that probably the most helpful part of the journey has been like other founders and really founders of people, whether they're successful founders or even struggling founders. The lessons and the information and the insights that you learn from those conversations have probably been the most valuable. And just because they've been there and have had similar experiences, a lot of challenges, like even with my family and friends, there's a level of understanding that they just don't understand, regardless of how much they try, just because they're not physically the founder of an organization. And it's not a negative comment towards them, but it's just having people that have been there that have that weight of what that means. Founders get that with each other.
And what's your best means of finding other founders to connect to?
Well, so I was lucky I got into those accelerators. So now I was plugged into the network. What I would just say is it feels like most communities have a startup community. And I've thought, like, when I was raising capital, I had an opportunity to raise more capital than I took, so I turned down capital, and I just went to the founders that I knew, and they were connecting me to other people. And the one individual that I spoke to, he and I never met. It was the first time we had a conversation, and he just had an exit and he raised capital, so he had the experience to provide insights. And he asked me some really good questions. He gave me his opinions around like things on why he made certain decisions. And at the end, I reconnected with him in person at a sports game that we were both invited to. But I ended up not actually taking the advice that he gave me, but through the advice that he gave me, that he asked certain questions that made me come to the conclusion of what worked for me based upon my situation. And when I talked to other people, I just didn't get those levels of questions and that debate, because it was his internal debate as he was going through his experience to come to his conclusion that helped me kind of have my internal debate to get to my conclusion, even though they weren't the same. It was probably the most helpful conversation that I had. And we are in completely different industries, completely different products. Like, his is a product, mine's a SaaS-based solution. It's just different journeys, but at the fundamental core, it was fundraising and growth capital and similar decisions that needed to be thought through.
One of the things I love about talking to different founders is the fact that every founder is bombarded with information, be it social media, like formal media, like books, different opinions of different founders, different opinions of different like mainstream entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, you just have to make your own decision, because there's too much information, and you're the one in the driver's seat. You can't let other people drive the car for you if you're in the driver's seat.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's the founders' decisions, and they have to live with them. Like, everybody else could give advice, but if we have to live with the decisions we make, whether they're positive decisions or negative ones, and every decision impacts every other decision. So you got to be comfortable with something. And if, like, what I found for me, if I'm not fully comfortable with something, I usually make the other decision, because comfort is what I'm pretty cautious of a person. So comfort is probably one of those moves that I need, but I can, just need comfortability, not necessarily. Does that make sense? I'm expressing. Really.
I hear you. Yeah, I think other people think likewise, even if they aren't aware. I think that's a pretty common way of operating. You have to be true to yourself at the end of the day, because you have to live with your decisions, and other people don't live with the consequences. They just see the outside.
Right. And then they give the advice and then move on. And and we're stuck in the business.
Something else to consider is that advice is not also indefinitely useful. Advice is also specific to a particular time, location, scenario. And if they give you advice today, the value of that advice may change as circumstances change, or based on information they may not have available to them. So the person who has the most information is definitely the
Yeah.
founders or whoever is the
Yeah.
C-suite.
No, yeah, that makes sense. I like that the way you stated that.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I just want to be sensitive towards your time. So I just like to wrap up with the same final question I ask everybody. For all of our guests who are watching, sorry, for all of our viewers who are watching who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So they can email me. It's Julia at RxLightning, and .com, of course. Yeah, so email is probably the best. My email gets flooded like hopefully everybody else. So I will respond. Just might be a little bit delayed. They could also look me up on social media, and I think that I can give you all that information. And LinkedIn messages work too.